All right. Now, how about the origin of life? Well, whether or not we can discover a reasonable, naturalistic, and scientific explanation for the origin of life without the need for divine intervention, or whether we can discover characteristics of life that are the best explained by an intelligent designer, has long been a topic of debate. And even in American courtrooms, it's been a topic of debate in the early and late 90s as well. And that debate has for quite some time centered on scientific considerations. But some philosophers have resisted, in principle, and not due to any current limitations to our scientific knowledge, the notion of a purely naturalistic, a physicalist account of life's origin. And they have done this on the basis of a purely philosophical argument. Again, those scientists keep wanting to creep out of their scientism, at least the scientists that want to claim that all authority of knowledge rests in them or their pedigree, and they keep dipping their toes into the philosophical realm.
Right. And so what he tells us here is that scientific or naturalistic attempts to define or provide essential characteristics of life, right? What is life? Right? What are the essential characteristics of life? He says the scientific or naturalistic attempts flounder because, as many philosophers have pointed out, life is what he calls univocal projectable predicate. There you go. That's what life is. It's a univocal projectable predicate. He says, what in the world does this mean? And so he kind of helps us to work through this. He says, first, the term life is something that we predicate or we affirm, right? So that's the first notion of predicate of certain things and not of others. And second, life is univocal. Well, what is that? Well, it's not equivocal. Okay, well, that is, it means that the same thing, whenever we employ the term, it means the same thing. So, for instance, if we say that a dog or a human or a fish is alive, the term life is used in the same way for all of those types of, animals or fish, right? And so different living things may live different ways and sustain their lives by employing different factors, but they are all living. So the notion of univocal with regard to life can be applied to many different kinds of lives, right, that are lived. And then so it's predicate, right? We affirm it. It's univocal, right? We can, and not equivocal, we can, employ it over the term over various kinds of lives. And finally, life is projectable. He says, while we start out by using the term for living things with which we are acquainted, we can use the term for yet things that can be discovered or possibly, other types of lives and living, right? For instance, if we discovered life in outer space, we can call it life, right? Mm-hmm. Or if we discovered finally unicorns, we can say they have life, right? And so it is projectable to things that we haven't even discovered yet. So it's univocal, right? It means the same thing employed in different kinds of lives. It's obviously a predicate that we affirm. And finally, it's projectable. We can use the term to project the things that we haven't discovered yet. So that's the philosophical notion of the kind of how we describe life.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, the multicelled organism on Mars, well, we know that's just a clump of cells, and we know that's not living, so we don't have to care about it. So. But now a problem has arisen from the biological attempts to define or essentially characterize life. Life is also univocally predictable of disembodied souls after death, of angels, and of God himself. Even if none of these things were to exist, their possible existence is coherent and intelligible. And the projection of life into possibly living things should be univocal, meaning having the same meaning as when life is applied to actual organisms. But none of these entities satisfy physical, biological characteristics for life. Thus, life itself cannot be physical. So the argument goes, and there will never be a strictly scientific account of life or its origin.
Right. So the notion here is that we can use the term life univocally for things like angels, which are not physical beings. So if we can use the term for things like angels that are not physical beings, that means that physicality isn't essential for life. And if it's not essential for life, if physicality isn't, then how can science study it if it just studies physical things? Mm-hmm. That's right.
Right. It falls outside the realm of science.
Yeah, exactly. So interestingly, he says many philosophers have provided new evidence for this argument by claiming following biologists, that living things are constituted by information. And so, but apart from a few exceptions, many, perhaps most philosophers that work in this area have claimed that information, notice, is immaterial, more fundamental to reality than matter, and given its nature, there can be no material explanation for the origin of immaterial information and thus for the origin of life.
Right. Yeah, it's that idea that, information is there to communicate. And so how do you have communication without the thing that communicates? So it seems like there's intelligence that is baked into that idea. And I don't think the scientists want to go there.
That is the authority of thesis for philosophy.
Right. Right. And so that's the first one.